Hello everyone and welcome to another video of VChess, and in today's video I'm going to be going over round 3 which I had in the Newport Major. Now this was a long time ago, it was last year in I think August, but I figured that I haven't gone through all of the 5 rounds and I did win this tournament, and I've got a lot of insights now, so let's go through some of these games. So in this game I was playing as white, I was playing against J, let's call them, just using their first initial for privacy, and I was 1674 FIDE at the time, and my opponent was 1824 FIDE at the time. Now I started with the move d4, and my opponent played c5, which is the old Benoni. Now I'd prepared for this. Now against e5, I had e4 prepared. So the reason you play e4 here is to grab central space, and the thing for black is they don't have a lot of space, and actually it's a weird configuration. You would think that white's knight should be on c3 and f3, but actually those aren't the best squares. Now this is going to be a bit of a lesson almost. So usually you want your knights to go on to c4, so either you can get this via f3, d2 and c4, and you want a knight on c3. But there's another way to get there, see? So there's 1, 2, 3 and 4, so you spend 4 tempos to get the knights to these optimal squares where they place pressure on all of the center and they support your center, right? You can get the knights there. 1, 2, and then 3, 4. And this is what I tried in the game. So d6, I went for the move knight to e2, which has almost never been seen, as you can see in the database. Knight to e2 isn't even right at the bottom. It's at 0%, which obviously is like 0.0, 0.4, below 0.5. This is a really small minority of the games. So knight to e2, my opponent goes bishop e7. So a plan for black in these types of positions is, because you place all your pawns on dark squares, this bishop becomes quite a bad piece, so you want to trade it off with bishop e5 for this good bishop which white has on c1, because these pawns are on light squares. Now after knight e3, because I'm trying to get the knights like this, remember? Now bishop g5 is played. Now here, if I do play bishop takes g5, and I'll check with the engine. Well, bishop takes g5, the engine finds this line okay. I wouldn't be so confident though, because although I do get quite a lot of activity, and I can get lots of pressure on black's position with moves like h4, bring the queen to f3, rook h3, maybe rook g3. At some point, maybe give a check on b5, because that bishop won't be doing much. But the problem here is that black's lost their worst piece, and I think white might not be able to get an advantage as easily. So instead, I went knight d2 here. Now my opponent went knight d7, and now here I played the move knight c4. And the reason was, I calculated for about 5 or 10 minutes here. I saw that d6 was very weak. Now if bishop takes c1 is played here, it would be the move queen takes c1, and after something like queen c7 or queen to e7, there's always the move knight to b5, and I'll have 2 attackers against d6 while black only has 1 defender, and I'll be winning the pawn, and this king will be in absolute shambles. I can probably bring this queen over for a check if this king goes to e7, take on g7, it'll be absolute mayhem. So my opponent had to go back to e7, which isn't something you'd want to do, right? Now here I played the move a4. Now a4 it wasn't exactly necessary, because b5 is stopped, but at some point, if black does play a6, then you'd have to play a4 anyway. And also, okay, there's something actually a really important lesson here. I'm just going to play some random moves now. If I play the move a4 here, it's not the most accurate move, I would say, because black can play this line. If they go a6, obviously this is really effective, isn't it? And then black's plan doesn't make sense. But black can play the move knight to a6, which is this really good move, and you can get the knight to b4, push a6, go rook b8, and then push b5. And the reason for this is that a4 has created a massive hole on b4. And this works especially better if a pawn is on c4 as well, because then the knight can't really be kicked out by any pawns. I'm not sure if it's 100% effective here, but let's go back to the game. So I played a4 here, and after knight b6, now black has the more cramped position, so when you're in so if you have a less cramped position or your opponent has a more cramped position, you shouldn't be looking to trade the pieces. So I played the knight to e3 here, which is a nice move, and is trying to centralize the knight, potentially bring it towards the king side at some point. After the move knight to f6, I played the move g4, which is a really interesting move. And the reason is that it looks like white can't play this move. But the problem for black is that they can't find a way to exploit this. The reason is that the center is completely closed, right? So all the center is completely compact. Black can't push f5 anytime soon. Black can't push b5 anytime soon either. So g4 is a move which kind of tells black that I have attacking intentions. He's still castled. Now here I was looking at the move g5, and I don't remember my exact analysis, but I think I was looking along the lines of g4 knight here, and something like bishop b5. But I'm not 100% sure, and I think I was thinking about bringing knight to f5. But my opponent castled. I went rook g1 here. I don't think rook g1 was the most accurate move. Probably h4 was, and we will check with the engine. And h4 was the best move, or queen f3 as well. So rook g1 might have been a bit passive, honestly. But rook g1 is nevertheless... Rook g1 is nevertheless quite a good move. And after the move knight to e8, which doesn't make too much sense, but I guess it's prophylactic. So prophylaxis is when in chess, it's a term in chess where you play a move which before your opponent actually threatens it. So I guess he thought I was going to push g5, so we went knight to e8. Now I went for the move knight to f5. If he'd gone g6, I would have probably gone for bishop h6 because it takes, and there's g takes f5, and black's in a lot of trouble here. In fact, I think black's almost completely lost. Yeah, no, I think black might be lost after queen g4 here, because I don't think there's any way to defend g7 because you're threatening to take on f8, and there's no way to actually. Might be knight to f6. Then there's queen g7, obviously. So that looks losing for black. And my opponent went bishop g5 again, trying to trade off this bad bishop because of all these pawns for this good bishop because of all of these white colored pawns, right? So I actually took on g5 because I thought this would accelerate my attack. And now here I went for a move which I'm not very happy with, but the problem was here that after queen f3, I couldn't find a line. I'd been calculating g takes f5, this was the problem. After queen takes h4, I couldn't find a satisfactory way to meet queen f4 during the game. So I went for the move rook h1. Now my opponent went g6. If I would go knight to h6 here, king g7, g5, I was worried about the move f5, and all of a sudden my king looks quite weak, and black can push f4, maybe bring the knight over to c7, bring the knight back to d7, and I can't see how white really progressed in this position. They can maybe even go f6 as well, just try and chip away. Might be h5 here though, so I'm not 100% sure. After knight to e3, my opponent went knight g7, so trying to get this move f5 in. I went h5, trying to discourage this, because if f5 I think is h6 here, and then knight would have to go back, g takes, and I can open up the g file, go something like queen h5 maybe, or just e takes f5, and then bring the queen to h5, bring the bishop to d3, and it's quite a nice position, maybe take on f5 when the rook captures, ideas like that. And my opponent went queen f6, I'm assuming probably just to try and... I don't really understand the idea of queen f6, honestly, though. I think it's just trying to safeguard the king, maybe get the queen to f4 at some point, maybe have to rotate back. I don't fully understand queen f6, but I played h6, which I don't... honestly, I was a bit worried here, I think, so... After... I think I was worried about... I think black has the threat of something here. I think I was worried about the threat of queen f4, maybe. Knight g2, yeah, so if queen f4 and then if knight g2, they can bring the queen back to g5, and I wasn't too sure how I can actually break through. Here I went h6. After knight to e8, I went rook g1, and I didn't really like how I was going forward in the game. Now, after queen h4 here, I calculated queen f3, queen takes h6, rook h1, which wouldn't be good. But I was also worried about queen f4 here as well. And here I think I'd seen just g5 here. And although the problem here is that there is f6, so I might have calculated rook h1 as well if I'm not wrong. Although again, there's knight to f6 here. And then there's lots of problems because f3 you're just losing the piece, and so This game is very complicated. This is probably the most complicated game I've played for a long time. I've had some more complicated games since then, but in that tournament for sure, this was the most interesting and complicated game. And let's go back to the game. Now, after bishop d7, I played the move a5, knight c8. I was just trying to gain tempos. I want to bring his pieces back. I was trying to delay the move a5 for as long as possible, because after b5, you can go en passant and take. But if the pawn is on a4, I'll just show an example. So I'll play a random move here. Now he can go b5. Just to illustrate the point, you can go b5 takes, and maybe knight takes b6. But if I had the pawn on a4, I'll just show an example. If I have the pawn on a4 and he tries to push b5, then I can actually take, and maybe I'm not losing the pawn, and I'll just be up the pawn. But a5, knight c8, and I went g5. I'm clamping down on his king, except there's no way for me to actually attack his king. Now, here I was really worried about f6, and I think I'd calculated the line queen g3 here, which I'm not sure. I think the engine sees as okay, but I didn't really like this position for white, and I was worried that the tables were turning on me almost, if that makes sense. But my opponent went a6. I think he was trying to maybe push b5 at some point, but I think maybe you could have pushed b5 already here. Oh no, sorry, you can't push b5 here. Sorry. Yeah, you've got two pieces on there, but maybe you could have gone rook. You could have gone rook b8, tried to push b5 there. a6, and after bishop d3, I went just discouraging f5. He went b5, and after a takes b6, en passant, queen takes b6. He's attacking b2. I went knight c4, and then I went for the move rook a3, trying to get the rook to b3. At this point, everything switched over from everything which was happening on the king side to everything that's happening on the queen side. So it's a very big change. So bishop b5, I played the move king e2. Engine, I think, liked king d2 a bit more. I'm not 100% sure as to why. I think you can bring this rook over maybe to e1 at some point when f5 is played, and there might be some weaknesses. I think it's just subtleties, honestly. But my opponent went queen e7 here, and he finally blundered, and I got the move knight takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes a8, b takes e4, and bishop takes e4. And I was up the exchange here. So after f6, I played the move queen h3, trying to get into e6. He went knight b6. I managed to trade off the queens. After rook a7, he went king g8. Now bishop b5. And now this is the part where I really should have played more accurately. So bishop b5 is the best move here. Knight c8. And now here I went rook a8. But I'd missed that this knight is trying to get back to c7. So the best move here is rook b7. Okay. The best move here is rook b7. The problem is that black's pieces are completely paralyzed now, because these knights can't get anywhere. Because this square is taken, this square is taken, all of these squares are taken, especially by that pawn as well. So black basically has no moves. The problem with rook a8 was that I took my eye off of this square, and he went knight c7. And after rook a5, it's not so simple, because he went f5. And after f3, I was a bit worried about f takes, and rook f4. But I was confident with the idea of king e3. And I'd just be defending the pawn. Maybe I can bring the rook over at some point. But he didn't do that. He went knight to a7, and I went. So the idea is rook takes a7 is knight takes b5. And I didn't like the idea that his knight's getting into d4. Problem is here that there's rook d7, king h8, and there's rook a1. Because I'm actually trying to push c4 now, because I want his knight to get away from the a7 square. So I can take on h7. So I'll just an example. Like, if he plays rook e8 here, I could push c4 maybe. Knight d4, king d3. You can take on f3. Then I go rook a to a7. And then if he goes back to d4, for example, the threat is go rook g7. Oh, wow, I've highlighted everything. King f8. And then rook h8 checkmate. And this was basically the idea which I missed during the game. Thinking superficially. He went here. Now there's the move rook takes c5, which I completely did not cross my mind. And by the way, both of us have around 1 or 2 minutes at this. I think 5 minutes at this point. So I get to go d takes c4 here, and there's this beautiful idea of going rook d1, rook d8, and black cannot stop it because The king is paralyzed, the knight's paralyzed, everything is paralyzed, and this is just winning, which is one of the most insane ideas I've seen. Now after f4, I was thinking, okay, I've got the way into this. I went bishop b5, brought the bishop to c6. His king is completely paralyzed. I brought the king to c3, and now here I should have pushed b4 because then I can actually open up the position. After takes, I can go king takes b4. I can maybe push c4 or c5 at some point. Just open up the position, and I will break through at some point. And then here, it was a sad moment because I played the move rook a7, blundering knight b5, and all of a sudden, black is in a better position because now I'm up a pawn, but the problem is, in fact, I'll show the best line now, and we'll turn off the engine because this is a very interesting line. So after rook d7, there's the move king c3, and after the move king d8, threatening knight c8, right? King b2, the only move, knight c8, and I have to take, otherwise I'm losing the piece. After rook takes a7, there's bishop g4, and this is meant to be a drawn ending. This would have been a drawn ending if he'd played it. My opponent went rook d7, and after king c3, he blundered back. If I take on c8, he takes on a7. That's his plan, right? But he missed. I had rook a8. And after rook takes b7, rook takes c8, his king is trapped on the 7th rank. My rook swings over. I take on h7. I take something else, or I move across, and then I promote to a queen. And that's exactly what happened. You went rook d8, rook takes h7, king e8, rook h8, king e7, rook takes d8, and he can't stop promotion. And in this position, my opponent resigned. And I don't know what to say. This was really an insane game. From the way it was like all the mistakes we made as beginners, not as beginners, but as amateurs in this really complicated position, where I managed to get into this weird bind on the king side. Where I can't actually attack the king, and then my opponent just switching up the play to the queen side, and then making a blunder. But then me not being able to convert this ending, and then blundering knight b5 with rook a7. But then my opponent blundering back. I mean, it just shows like everyone makes mistakes, and chess is a cruel game, isn't it? But yeah, so after this game, I was on 3 out of 3, and round 4 was... You'll find out for next time, and I might put round 4 and 5 in the same video for the next video. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one.